Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And the saving of the A's has not gone well here over about the last month and a half of this 2035 season. As we reach the All-Star break here in 2035, our A's positively are in second place in the AL West, but we are 15 games behind the Texas Rangers, who have beaten us in the division the last couple of seasons and look poised to do it again this year. We're also a game and a half out of the final wild card spot at this point. So as we try to guide this team to a fifth consecutive playoff appearance and a sixth playoff appearance in the last 7 years, if the season were to end today, we would not make it. We have recently made a trade that we think should help us get back into playoff position, and that is renting the excellent first baseman Luis Lujan from the Boston Red Sox organization. All Lujan has done is lead the American League in home runs 2 of the last 3 years. And with 28 combined homers this season, including 3 in his first 5 games with Oakland, he's second in the American League this year. So certainly hoping that having Mr. Lujan in the middle of our lineup for the remainder of this season will provide us with a few more wins than we would have had otherwise, and hopefully help us get into a playoff position. Unfortunately, the guy who has been in the middle of our lineup for the last 6.5 seasons is out. Colt Keith, plantar fasciitis, going to be out for 5 to 6 weeks, so with a likely rehab assignment for the soon-to-be 34-year-old who's already fragile physically. Probably not going to be seeing him back until we get to September call-ups. Keith has already spent over a month on the IL earlier this year with an abdominal strain, and he's having, at this point, the worst year of his 7-year run with us in Oakland. Played just 59 games, and when all is said and done, is going to be lucky to get to 85, 90 games on the year. The 107 WRC plus he's put up for us this season is the worst of his career. Hitting .242 with 9 homers and 32 ribbies and 223 at-bats. As we have talked about over the last several episodes, we originally traded for Keith, took on a contract that he had signed with Detroit, and they retained a good chunk of that, which made him pretty economical for us. We signed him to a 5-year extension 2.5 years ago. It was $18 million for each of the first 3 seasons. It's going to bump up to $25 next year, and then he's got a player option at $26 million the year after that. So Keith does have 10-5 rights, but he would consider a trade to several teams at this point. And given the financial situation we're going to be in next year, as well as the fact that now Keith is not going to be able to help us likely until September, I think there's certainly more of an incentive for us to think about moving on from him. Negatively, after the great run he's had with us, he's obviously extremely popular, so we'll be taking a significant hit to fan interest most likely if he moves on from our team. We had made some pretty solid progress this year, so that would be upsetting to lose that, but it still may be the right decision for us. Before we get into those trade decisions, though, something I don't normally spend too much time on are the All-Star Prospects game rosters, and I probably should do this because it gives me an opportunity in most seasons to talk about some of the top players in our organization who may be able to help us down the line. We had 3 players in the All-Star Prospects game this year. Doug Weiss, the pitcher who we picked out of Austin P just over 2 years ago at this point. Split the year this season between Double-A Midland, and we recently promoted him to Triple-A Las Vegas. Was 3-0 with a 2.10 ERA in Double-A. He's 1-0 in 2 games in Triple-A, but his ERA is 6.5. Still think that Mr. Weiss could be a pretty interesting pitcher for us. He added that changeup, which a couple years ago in the development lab, which does give him an opportunity to potentially be a starter for us. Still has some work to do, and obviously isn't tearing up AAA, but the 23-year-old is not too far off from being ready for the majors. If he makes some progress over the next month and a half, it's not inconceivable he could be a September call-up. Chuck Huntley is a left-handed closer for our Class A team right now. A sixth-round pick in 2032. 1-0 with 26 saves and a sub-1 ERA as he moved into A-ball this year. Struck out 42 batters in 36 2/3 innings. Would expect that we'll be looking to promote him to high A relatively soon. He's more than competent at the Class A level, as we've seen in his performance this year. Looking at the Midwest League, still looks pretty good. His control may be a little bit below average for the league, but his stuff and his movement are both fine. So I would expect that by August 1st at the latest, we'll have Huntley up in high A ball. And the third and final prospect in our organization who is in the All-Star prospect game, Arturo Uresti, number 19 prospect in baseball, top prospect in our organization. He advanced to high A ball this year. Positively, 15 homers, 40 ribbies, and 77 walks in just 83 games. Has put up a 138 WRC plus and a 2.6 WAR. Negatively, he's striking out in over a third of his at-bats, and he's hitting just 231. But still think that Uresti is likely to move up to AA at some point this year. Turned 22 right when the season was getting underway. He's pretty strong in terms of his skills for the high A level, even though he is somehow only hitting 231. Looking at the Texas League where he'd go in AA, the contact and the gap power still a little bit below average, but he will definitely end up in AA at some point this year. I think maybe August 1st would be a potential starting date for him that makes sense at that level as well. But as we prepare for the Major League All-Star game, in addition to the Minor League All-Star game, our attention turns back to this season for our Oakland Athletics. And the big question is, what do we do with Mr. Keith? We're expected to win the championship this year. We're obviously not going to do that unless we make the playoffs. Expected to upgrade at second base, which we've done a pretty good job of, with Alejandro Landin performing much better in his first full year in the majors than he did last year when he had his first foray into Major League Baseball. And we're also expected to improve fan interest. And I don't think there can be any debate that getting rid of Colt Keith lowers our chance to win the championship this year, and it's also going to have a likely pretty significant negative impact on our fan interest. So the two most important goals that we have with ownership are both negatively impacted by moving on from Colt Keith. But there are reasons to still do that. And that's what I'm going to talk through here. Appreciate all of you who have shared thoughts in the comments to the last episode about what we should do. The preponderance of our worldwide scouting department that has opined on the topic believes that it is time now to move on from Mr. Keith. He has been a perennial all-star for us. Won a World Series with us in 2029, his first season with us. And he was also a Wild Card Series MVP in 2032. Keith has had a remarkable run with us. As we mentioned, we traded for him in that 28 to 29 off season. And since then, we were a team that had never made the playoffs our first 5 seasons in Oakland. Since bringing Keith on board, we've made the playoffs in 5 of 6 seasons, 4 in a row at this point. And he was our best player when we won a shocking World Series in 2029 in his first season. He instantly made our offense better. And over the course of his 6.5 seasons with Oakland, even if he never plays another game for us this year, he still would have averaged 30 doubles, almost 31 homers, and exactly 100 ribbies a season through the 7 years that he's been with us, with a 135 WRC plus. He has been the best offensive player for us in the history of this playthrough, and he was the best hitter on our team for most of his tenure with us, although over the last couple of seasons he's certainly gotten passed by Jake Ortega as our best player. But an excellent player who's still an above-average offensive player, and quite honestly, if he hadn't been dealing with that first injury and now this second injury, wouldn't be shocking if he was better than a 107 WRC plus player. Looking at his current ratings, still has pretty good home run power and a pretty good eye and a solid glove at third base. But there are negatives about Mr. Keith as well. He's been fragile physically since we brought him on board. We have been extremely fortunate with his health. He's played over 130 games every year that he's been with us, and he's averaged until this season almost 150 games a year over the last 4 years with us in his late 20s and early 30s. But that fragility is showing itself this year with a second trip of a month plus to the injured list likely for Mr. Keith. And it's not inconceivable that he comes out of that, because he'll be 34 by the time he's healthy, wrecked rather than fragile. And that contract for this year is fine, but for the next couple of years is pretty imposing, because if he does end up wrecked physically, if his ratings start to, or more accurately continue to kind of decline, given that he's well into his mid-30s, it's very conceivable he might opt into that player option, and $51 million over the upcoming 2 seasons for a potentially broken down and less effective Colt Keith is a price that would be very difficult for our Oakland A's to be able to pay and remain competitive. And when we looked at the options to potentially move on from him last offseason, he was not willing to waive his 10-5 rights and the no-trade clause. So it is conceivable that Keith could come back from this current injury, and obviously will be past the trade deadline by the time he does that. He could be wrecked physically. He's probably heading into the years where his ratings are going to continue weakening, and he might just say to us, hey, I've loved it here in Oakland, and I want to spend the rest of my career here. And then we're potentially stuck with him for the next 2 years with a number that is very difficult for us to be able to afford. But as I said earlier, I don't think there's any debate that if we are in the World Series this year and Colt Keith is on our roster, we have a better chance at winning the World Series this year. Which certainly suggests that we keep him around, since we're a win-now team. But when I think about trying to run this franchise responsibly, while we've got a better chance of winning the World Series with Colt Keith on our roster, I think we have a better chance of guiding this team into the playoffs if we've got someone who can give us production over the next 6 weeks while Colt Keith is laid up. So it's a tough situation. I think if we move on from Keith now, we probably give ourselves a better chance to make the playoffs and put ourselves in position to get into that World Series. But if we're able to do that and make a long run through the playoffs and get into the World Series, obviously you'd prefer to have someone with Colt Keith's resume on your team. But ultimately, given his fragility, given his age, given the money that he's set to make, given that he can always decide, even when we just sim forward one day to tomorrow, that he won't consider a trade anywhere anymore, I think the responsible thing for this organization is to move on from Mr. Keith. And I don't love the fact that it probably is going to make our fans upset. I don't love the fact that we're giving up on the best player who's been in our organization throughout the 11 and a half years of this playthrough. But we knew when we signed Keith to that 5-year extension that after those first 3 years at $18 million, we were likely going to face a decision point. And with him now likely injured into September, potentially coming back wrecked, and certainly coming back at the age of 34, I think the responsible thing is to entertain offers. And I have spent a lot of time offline since the last episode looking at every different option and permutation that I could come up with. And honestly, I think the guy that we started this conversation about, Rodney Mesidor, is the best option out there. Mesidor, third baseman in the San Francisco organization, better fielder than Keith, certainly not the same kind of hitter. He's 25 years old and he's also fragile, which is not optimal. But he's a lot younger than Keith. We still think he can get a little bit better in terms of his BABIP and his home run power, and certainly an improvement in his home run power would help. But he would absolutely upgrade our defense from Mr. Keith. He's been injured a good chunk of this year, but he's been an above-average offensive player in AAA. Still only has 57 AAA games at this point. But at the age of 25 and looking at where we have him scouted, I don't think there's really a lot left for him to do at AAA, so I think we certainly could promote him. I did, as I said, look at prospects, look at experienced players, look at third basemen specifically, and Mesidor, I guess I'm going to call him Mesidor, is not perfect, and he's not Colt Keith, but I think he's the best option that we can get for him today. We can also get a little bit of cash in return for what it's worth. We can get $543,000 back from the Giants in addition to Mesidor. You can see that that improves the money we have available significantly, which potentially gives us more levers to press, either trying to pick up the impossible to sign pitcher we picked up in the 5th round of the draft, or taking on more contract in other rentals that we may be interested in pursuing. I'm not looking forward to seeing the hit that we take in fan interest when we move on from Keith, but given his age, given the contract, given the no trade clause, and given the injury situation, while I'd love to have Colt Keith on a playoff roster and a World Series roster, and we wish him the best of luck in San Francisco, I think that the best opportunity for us to get this team out of the slump that we've been in for the last month and a half and guide us to the playoffs is to have a guy like Mesidor in the mix to potentially play third baseman for us for the next 6 weeks or so. So thank you for a great career in Oakland, Colt Keith. We're definitely going to miss you. But I don't think we can afford to potentially be stuck with that contract for the next 2 seasons after this one, particularly if he comes back wrecked and he continues to age like any player would. So Mesidor is a Oakland A. The reaction of the fans is terrible. Only a 2-point hit, so that definitely could have been worse. I can't really rant about that. The fans should be a little upset that we're moving on from a guy like Colt Keith after everything he's given to us over the years. So we're going to still have to figure out whether Mesidor is the guy who ends up on our roster. I tend to think he probably will. Steve Allison, who's been in AAA for us good chunks of this year, also could be in the mix for more time at third base as well. But with the hit that we took to fan interest and the fact that we are, this year, somewhat surprisingly, actually struggling more with our pitching. Actually, now it's the same. We were 6th in runs scored, but now we're 7th in runs scored, 7th in runs allowed. So we're pretty much middle of the pack, mediocre in both of those categories, just like we've been worse than mediocre for the last month and a half with an 18-22 record since the start of June. Hoping that the addition of Mr. Lujan will help give that disappointing offense a boost, but certainly the loss of Keith isn't going to help, but we weren't going to get anything from Keith for the next month and a half anyways. But I do feel like we've got to do something to try to improve our pitching staff, and there's a guy who we've been eyeing for the last 8 or 9 months at this point that I think it's time to finally bring on board, and hopefully he can help us improve from having the 10th best starters ERA in baseball, or in the American League more accurately. And that player is the pitcher Gabe Brewster, soon to be 26 years old, right near the end of the playoffs this year. He has, over the course of 3 major league seasons, been a slightly above average major league pitcher in terms of his FIP minus. We like a lot of things about his personality. We love the fact that he's extremely popular, and bringing him on board could potentially help offset the loss with the fans of moving on from Colt Keith. He's got really good stuff, excellent fastball and slider, a decent change, and a curve. Big knock on him is he's a pitcher with fly ball tendencies who is more susceptible than the average major leaguer in terms of giving up home runs. And we've seen that over the course of his major league career, where he's given up 33 home runs in 217 innings pitched. But I think he's still an option that could help the back end of our rotation. Unfortunately, the price for him has gone up a little bit even since we checked in on him right before the draft, which was only 5 days ago. And I don't think I necessarily did this during the video, but certainly something I've been looking at offline. And the only guys that we could send to pick up Brewster straight up are Byron Brain, Brady Harris, the recently acquired Luis Lujan, and Doug Weiss, one of the top prospects in our organization that we just talked about. I don't think we want to give up any of them for Brewster, but when we think about our pitching staff, one of the weakest links this past season has been Mike Lambert, a guy who we picked up in a trade about a year and a half ago with Tampa that we thought was going to be a very important starter for us for many years to come. Put up a 3.18 ERA a year ago, but his ERA has ballooned to 5 this year. Barely above replacement level. And his stuff is now below major league average. He's only 26 years old. And since we picked him up, he's lost a lot of stuff. And he's actually lost a little bit of velocity off his fastball, which for a 26-year-old is troubling to me. Maybe he somehow turns that around. He's also a guy who's very popular, so moving on from Lambert potentially offset some of the benefits we'd get by bringing an extremely popular player by Brewster on board. But if we put Lambert into the deal, that at least gets us into a situation where there's other players to talk about that can get the deal done. Now, they're the best players on our team and the best prospects in our organization. So I think there's still probably 2 guys that we add to this deal to get it done rather than 1. But I think we can get a deal done that we'll feel decent about. Hopefully Brewster is a better pitcher than Lambert this year and into the future. He's certainly more popular. I think it helps incrementally in terms of our ability to win this year. It helps incrementally in terms of the fans. The big question is the other 2 guys that we're going to give up in this deal, whether you think the relatively minor differences between Lambert and Brewster are compensated for by those other guys that we're giving up. And the frustrating thing about this deal is that when we looked at it 5 days ago, when we added in the minor league closer Greg Eakes in addition to Mike Lambert, that was enough to get the deal done. And now you can see adding in Eakes gives us a lot more options to get the deal done, but we still need to add in another player. Eakes is a pretty interesting guy. We picked him in the 17th round just 3 years ago out of Georgia Southern. The 24-year-old has got a captain personality, high leadership and work ethic. Looks like he could be a good, solid right-handed reliever for us. Ground ball tendencies, plus stuff, potentially plus movement, average control. Not a closer, but he's had a sub-3 ERA as the closer in Double-A for us this year, and I think he could certainly be a good major league pitcher for many years to come. And I do love that captain personality, but he's not a guy that I'm going to hold up the deal for. Alec Illich, who's been playing in AAA for us this year, having a fine season there, but not a big part of our future, is kind of a 4A guy. Gets the deal done and also lets the White Sox be willing to retain 70% of Brewster's minimum contract. So we do this deal, and our money actually improves a bit. I don't love letting go of Eakes. As I said, 24-year-old I think could be a nice reliever for many years to come. But as I said, I think Brewster is better than Lambert this year. He's also more popular. I'm worried about the home runs that he might give up, but not so much that I'm not going to make this trade. and hopefully it'll ultimately result in a little bit of positive influence on our fan interest. So we're going to go ahead and make the trade for Gabe Brewster. And doesn't look like actually any impact on fan interest. A little bit of a bummer and a little bit of surprising given that Brewster is extremely popular. But we didn't lose that much ground when we traded Colt Keith away. And I think our pitching staff is now a little better today than it was yesterday with the addition of Brewster onto the team. And going to have to figure out what we want to do with Mesidor as well. And we've decided what we're going to do. We're going to put Brewster right into the 3 spot, taking over for Lambert. Does put us in a situation where we now only have one left-hander in the rotation with our ace Jackson Ferris. But with Luke Little, Chris Carl, R.J. Cope, and Bobby Garland, we do have 4 left-handed arms out of the bullpen. Still considering potentially moving on from Jamie DeVore or Levi Sterling. DeVore's kind of been struggling all year. Sterling actually got off to a decent start, but has been struggling of late in the rotation. Caden Dana would be a guy that we could move into the rotation. Honestly, Bobby Garland is a guy that we could consider doing that with as well. He's off to a really nice start in his rookie season with us, but are a little concerned about his lack of control. And he also hasn't been in the highest pressure situations as a long reliever for us. But still may look to find another starting pitcher and or make a swap of one of the guys at the back end of our rotation as we try to make things better. Lineup-wise, we did put Mesidor onto the Major League roster, but Mesidor is only going to be playing for us regularly against left-handed pitching at least for the next week and a half. It's very conceivable he could end up as our everyday third baseman. Given that he is 25 and a half years old and he's pretty fully developed, I don't think it's going to hurt too much for him to not play every day. And for the near term, at least, we're going to weaken our defense against right-handed pitching. And we're going to put Byron Brain back into the starting lineup. He had lost his spot in the starting lineup when we brought Lujan on. But Brain, given that with the loss of Keith, Cabral is the only pure left-handed hitter we have in the lineup, although we do have 2 switch hitters, we're going to give Brain a chance to see if he can generate some offense. Both of our left-handed hitters, Cabral and Brain, are low average free swingers with potentially tons of power, but crazy amounts of strikeouts. And we're also going to be weaker defensively, moving Camacho from first to third, moving Brain from out of the lineup to first base. So I don't know that this is a long-term solution. I think Mesidor could conceivably end up in the starting lineup against righties also in the not-too-distant future. But we're going to try to give Brain a chance to show that he can generate a little bit of offense. 86 WRC plus in 78 at-bats for us this year. Could be one of his final chances. Actually, we're going to put Brain at DH. Lujan had been our DH, but I think he might be slightly better defensively than Brain is. Yeah, I mean, at least according to the numbers, the big thing Brain's got going for him is that he's a lot taller than Lujan. But his skills are not all that great. We're giving Brain a chance. I don't think our defense at first base is going to be all that critical. it may only be for a week or so to see if we can catch lightning in the bottle with him. But for the near term, we're going to try to go with offense against right-handed pitching. And we'll see whether the lack of defense ends up costing us. And unfortunately, things couldn't have gone worse coming out of the All-Star break. Dropped 3 in a row at home against San Francisco. Scored just 4 runs in the 3 games. Now we are on the road, 4 at Texas and 3 at Colorado before coming back for the final 2 games of the month before the trade deadline. So as we sit here on July 23rd, we are a 500 team. Certainly didn't think that this season was going to go this way, but we're now just 1 game out of 3rd place in the AL West, and we've slipped back to 3 games out of the wild card. Lujan stuck on 28 homers. Obviously, we haven't been scoring much lately. Ortega's been stuck on 22 steals for a while. He has moved up to 3rd in the American League in batter WAR, but we are a team that still is in need of something. Definitely has been a really rough stretch for us since the calendar turned to June, and still might need to do something else to shake up this roster and give ourselves a chance to guide this team back into the playoffs. And there are a few more hitters now on the trade block than there were the last time we checked in. Jackson Holliday still is not willing to waive his no-trade clause. Not that we'd probably be able to come up with a package to get him anyways. But I kind of feel like the area that I'd love to try to find some help would be in the starting rotation. And unfortunately, they're just not a big-time impact starting pitcher out there and available. And I don't know how much that's going to change over the next 9 days until we get to the trade deadline. Brewster's definitely not as impactful a move as we'd hoped to make, but he may be the only one that's out there. Could try to reunite with Bubba Chandler, who was with us years ago, but his profile is not all that exciting at this point as a guy who's closing in on 33 years old. He's not even starting anymore for the Braves, and he's put up a ERA of close to 7 this year. So whatever question we're asking, I don't know that Bubba Chandler is the answer, but he'll always have that world title with us, and he'll always have that shocking Cy Young award that he earned for us in 2029. (13-6) record with a 3.02 ERA, led the league in BABIP and WHIP, put up a 3.2 WAR. Not your typical Cy Young Award type of season, although it was one of the best seasons of Mr. Chandler's career, but he did earn that surprising Cy Young Award for us the year that we won the World Series. But we're in a tough situation. You can see we've now slipped back to 9th in runs scored, still 7th in runs against. So perhaps not surprisingly, with Colt Keith gone and Luis Alada still out for another 6 weeks, that the offense is continuing to struggle. We did get another home run from Brain, so he's accounted for a big chunk of our offense over the last 3 days, sadly. And we're actually going to call it an episode. I thought we would sim up to the trade deadline, but I have been searching like crazy for a starting pitcher or a left-handed bat that could help us, and banging my head largely against the wall, but Byron Brain, for whatever reason, has an insane amount of trade value. I mean, he's a potentially very good player. That home run power and that eye are both well above average, borderline exceptional. Question is whether he can get the contact better, and he's always going to strike out a ton. But he is a guy with those attributes, a pretty positive personality who can also play a competent defensive catcher. He hasn't hit much for us this year, as we know. But other teams see a lot of value in him. And there's some really interesting players we can get in return for him, which is kind of crazy given that the trade settings we're on, and you've seen guys like Jake Ortega essentially have little value in trades when we're trying to get a really good player. But like, we could trade Byron Brain straight up for first baseman Juan Ramos of Seattle, another left-handed hitter who has the same type of power and the same type of eye with much better contact. Now, he's only a first baseman. He can't play catcher. He's got some negative personality traits, and he also is out for the rest of this season, so he's certainly not going to help us win this year. But there's other guys who maybe, albeit not as good as Ramos, still are to me more interesting than Brain, just because I don't love the low contact, incredibly low strikeout profile, even if it is with great power and an excellent eye like Brain potentially has. I think other teams value that more than I do, and I want to spend a fair amount of time offline trying to figure out if there's a way to leverage Byron Brain into a player or a package that can move the needle for us and give us a roster that I like more than the one that we have right now. So I am going to focus on that offline. As we've talked about, we're 50-50. We're 3 games out of the playoffs in what is a year when ownership still wants us to win a World Series championship. And we want to guide this team into the playoffs for a 5th straight season. And right now, when we look at what we've put together with the 9th best offense and the 7th best pitching staff in the American League, that's not good enough to get it done. And we've been playing worse over the last close to 2 months at this point. So we're going to have to try to shake things up. And I want to spend some time thinking about how we might do that. So we are going to call this an episode here. Colt Keith, we wish him the best of luck when he gets back from his injury. Gabe Brewster hopefully becomes a big-time asset to us. And then obviously also we are hoping that our new young third baseman, Rodney Mesidor, plays well for us. And we've been facing righties only, so he still doesn't have his first major league at bat. But we've got a lot to think about with this team. If you've got ideas for us, would love to hear them. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.